Welcome to Paranormal M, your gateway to the world of the supernatural. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to stay in the loop with our creepy content. Enjoy the thrill of the unknown. I lived in a nursing home. When I was 15, I lived in a nursing home. My mom worked there. At the time, we were living in an already haunted home. I've posted about it on here already before, and that was falling apart. We had to move out fast. My mom was close with the owner of the facility that she worked at. The owner knew about her situation and offered for us to stay at the facility. There was an entire wing of rooms that had not been used in years. It was kept clean, but nobody really stayed in it. The owner of the facility told my mom that we could have the last two rooms at the end of the hallway. They're each across from each other. The doors to the wing were big, heavy ones. They were really loud when they were being used. The staff and residents didn't use this wing. That was because there was really nothing in there for anybody. It was just rooms with beds. Things were fine for a while. The only thing that I felt for the first few months there was our wing never really felt empty. The walk down to our rooms felt creepy. It just felt like there were people looking at you. The first small thing that really happened was one of my little sisters and I were goofing off with my mom's phone. That was while she was off working. We were recording ourselves, talking in silly voices and making silly sounds. At this point, I had the phone recording, but my sister and I were silent. We didn't know what to do or what to say anymore, so I stopped recording. The next day we went through all the recordings so we could hear how funny we sounded. Forgot about the last recording having no sound, and I played it. It was silent for a second, and then we heard a sound that was like someone drawing in a deep breath. We were shocked and we were really scared. The next thing that happened really scared me. It was nighttime and my mom was working. My sister was across the hall sleeping. I was watching TV. It was a normal night, nothing out of the ordinary, when all of a sudden the door to the room I was in started getting pounded on so heavily. It sounded like the door was going to bust down. I was startled. I said, "Hello?" No one answered. As the pounding was going on, the door handle started shaking like somebody was trying to get in. Mind you, I always left the door unlocked in case my sister woke up and needed me for anything. The pounding on the door was so violent and loud, I was afraid it was going to wake my sister across the hall. As it got louder and harder, I got scared, so I went and hid in the bathroom that was in the room. I was in there listening to the ruckus. I thought, wait, if someone came into the wing, I would have heard the doors open and latch shut. I knew then that there was no way there was an actual person banging on that door like that. Went on for about 5 minutes and then it stopped abruptly. I was shaken, but went down to the hallway to see if there were any dents in the door. There weren't, and there was no one out there either. I went in to check on my sister, and she was sound asleep. I went out and asked the staff if they had heard anything coming from our wing, and they said they hadn't. I even asked if a resident had somehow gotten into our wing, and they told me that everybody was in bed and accounted for. I knew it wasn't a resident, but there was no way any of them could have pounded on the door that violently. And nothing ever happened again, at least while we lived there, luckily. I have a ghost for a roommate. How do I talk to him? On 4 separate occasions, myself and 3 other people have seen an entity in my apartment, in which 2 who saw it at my apartment describe it as an older man in his 40s or maybe 50s. The first time I was having a video call with somebody was while I was eating pizza in my kitchen. A few moments after I left the kitchen, my friend asked if I was going to share with my roommate. I lived alone. They described it as a black shadow in the background. They didn't think much of it as maybe just somebody walking by. The second time, a girlfriend of mine claimed she could communicate with spirits. She asked her to, and, well, Basically, the conversation was very short, but it went along the lines of this. Are you here? I'm here. Does he know about you? Yeah. Okay, bye. She got spooked, I guess, and cut it short. As we were leaving, she said that he was staring at us from my porch, an older man. Third time I had a friend over who said that they were sensitive to spirit energy, and they could communicate. The second we walked in my apartment, she felt the energy, said he was harmless, but maybe just lonely. She felt him in the kitchen, and when we were leaving, she said that he was watching from the porch. I never mentioned the other encounter to her before this. The fourth time, I was live streaming on Twitch. I wish I saved this clip because I looked at the corner of my screen and somebody walked past me coming from my kitchen to my porch. Looked like a black shadow, kind of. But so today I talked to a medium. Now before I say what she said to me about the spirit, I never gave her any details on my experience with this spirit. I never told her of any of the other encounters other people have had either. But she claims it was like a middle-aged man named Joe. He had died of a heart attack sometime in the 90s. At first I was like, okay, sure. But then she said a couple of things that kind of caught my attention. She said that he likes my pets, which is funny because I swear I only see my cat looking up at somebody. But I mean, it could just be in my mind running with the thought, but sometimes I swear that cat's looking at someone. Another thing that he mentioned was he liked my guitar. He had one just like it. My guitar's a 90s Peavey, which would make sense if he had supposedly died sometime in the 90s. The other thing he said is that, he said it with a smile, is that he likes pizza. This is what really caught my attention. The first encounter I had with him, he was behind me in the kitchen while I was eating pizza while just video chatting with a friend. I asked her what he didn't like that I did, and she goes, he doesn't like it when you play loud music. I play in a rock band and we used to practice in my spare room. Needless to say, it got pretty loud in here. She says he's a good spirit, enjoys when I have company over, and just likes to make his presence known. Tonight when I got home, I went into my bedroom and lay down. I felt a sudden rush of energy and emotion as I sat on my bed and my light started flickering in my room. I think it was the spirit. Honestly, I'm not sure what to make of any of this, but I wanted to share this in a group of like-minded folks. I'd like to establish a direct communication with the spirit, learn more about it, and who it was as a human. I have a couple of ghost apps on my phone, but they seem really gimmicky. I was thinking of trying a Ouija board, but that seems like it could be a whole other story. Anybody have any suggestions on how this could, possibly make me form a better connection with the spirit? Any thoughts at all on this? She said his name was Joseph Swanson, likes to be called Joe. I don't know how long my landlord has owned this building, but I'm going to try to find out anything I can, if that person even exists. Not on a cartoon, that is. The Black Mass. This happened about 8 years ago. Never told this story in its entirety. But anyways, I was hanging out with one of my female friends one night. We decided to go for a walk to a nearby park. We had a bottle of spiced rum that we planned on drinking once we got there, but we ended up having some on the way. The walk to the park was about 2 or 3 miles from where we started. It took us a little over half an hour to get there. So it was around 7 p.m. It was early fall in Minnesota, so it had just started getting dark when we got to the park. We're talking and drinking and mess around at the park, and for a little while this happens before we decide to go sit on one of the benches that they have there. It's getting a little later at this point, and a bit cold. That's when the sun was setting, so we huddled up on the bench and continued drinking and talking for another good hour. The sun finally sets, and we're just having a casual conversation about God knows what. That's when we start hearing like a low hum. Neither of us thought too much about it, thinking it was just construction or traffic or whatever. But seeing as we're in a public park, it's a very populated part of the town with houses within throwing distance in a direction. So we ignored it, continued our conversation as it got a bit darker. We didn't have a plan for what we were going to do after, opting to just see where the night takes us. Here's where it gets weird. As we're just chilling on the bench, and we were facing an open baseball field with minimal fencing. It's dark by now, and as we're talking, we start hearing the low hum again. But this time it's louder. You can kind of hear which direction it's coming from. We both stop and look across the field to see what looks to be a shadow. We sit there and watch it for a second as it kind of sways, thinking maybe it's just a person. About 30 seconds pass and this thing starts getting larger and closer. We're freaking out now because this black mass is probably about 12 feet tall and maybe 6 feet across. It's coming towards us. Gets maybe within 20 yards of us, and then nothing. I blacked out, waking up the next morning on the porch of my mother's house about a mile away from where we were. I had a terrible headache, although that might have been from the rum. My mom's freaking out because, well, she's asking why I've cuts and bruises everywhere, thinking I got into a fight or something. I told her I had no idea. Sat there for a couple of hours trying to recollect my night, trying to figure out what happened. Then I get a call from a friend I was with. She was in the hospital with a broken wrist and a few scrapes. She asked me what happened, and I didn't even have an answer. She told me she didn't remember anything after the low hum and woke up at the hospital. To this day, I have no idea what actually happened that night. I've since lost contact with the friend I was with, but last time I talked to her, she had no more answers than me. I'd love to know if anybody's had anything similar happen. If anybody's interested in where this happened, look up Cavell Park in northeast Minneapolis, Minnesota. I haven't heard or had anything else happen in this area, so I don't know if, well, don't know everything that goes on, but I would like some answers. And I'd like to point out that if you're walking to a park in the middle of the night with a bottle of rum, and you wake up injured, both parties wake up injured, I think everybody has an idea on what might have happened, especially since you're no longer friends. The worst case of demonic possession ever. Halloween is near, and here I am to boost the hype up for you guys. So all the horror movie fans out there, most of you might be familiar with the 2005 horror movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. But did you know that the movie's based on a true event that took place in 1975 in West Germany? The event is so shocking that if you read the whole post, a couple of sleepless nights are guaranteed. The incident is about a girl named Anneliese Michel, born in 1952 in West Germany's Klingenberg. As a child, she was said to be brought up in a very religious way by her Catholic parents. She was termed as a very bright young girl. Everything was okay until 1968. That's when the 16-year-old experienced her first epileptic seizure, experienced paranormal presence for the first time. Over the next 4 years, she experienced 3 more seizures, even after doctors examined her and found nothing severe to describe her condition. She was prescribed some medication, but this did little to no good to her. By 1973, Anneliese was already suffering from depression, but things got worse after that. She started hallucinating demonic faces and hearing voices during praying. Told that she was damned to rot in hell. She also complained about smelling feces and burned objects which weren't there. Other people would also state that they smelt the same smells. She also exhibited intolerance to holy objects such as crucifixes, Bibles, holy water, and so on. She was unable to visit the church. It was reported that once as she was walking toward a holy shrine, she felt the ground burning her feet. By this time, Anneliese was convinced that she was possessed, blamed her mother for it because her mother had a child before marriage, and Anneliese believed the curse for her infidelity passed on to Anneliese. Her parents by this time were also convinced that she was possessed, contacted a local priest for an exorcism request, which was denied the first time. In the meantime, she started showcasing even stranger behavior, such as hurting herself and her family. Also started consuming spiders, flies, and worst of all, her own urine. She also showcased inhuman strength. It's reported that she could throw her sister around the room as if she was nothing more than a rag doll. It's also rumored that she once bit the head off a bird and ate it. She became even more sick considering the stuff she did and blamed herself for all of it, stating it was just because of her past wrongdoings. The bishop in 1975 finally granted the Michelle family request for an exorcism. A priest named Arnold Renz was given the responsibility of performing the exorcism. The first exorcism was performed in September 1975, which was then followed by 60+ more exorcism sessions. In the sessions, Annalise would scream in terrifying demonic voices, was said to be possessed by 6 demons named Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Hitler, Nero, and Fleischmann. Annalise eventually stopped eating as she stated the demons within her wouldn't let her eat. Her physical condition became very concerning as she only lost weight and just became extremely sick. But surprisingly, she also showed incredible strength even then. The exorcism sessions would benefit the poor little girl very little. She died on the 1st of July 1976. It's reported that she predicted her death beforehand accurately. Her dead body was estimated to weigh only about 68 pounds. After her death, the 2 priests and Michael parents were prosecuted and put on trial during 1978. The court was presented the tapes and the priests had recorded during the exorcism sessions. You guys can find some of the recordings on YouTube, but fair warning, the audio clips are extremely disturbing. The court ruled the priests suspended for 3 years and fined them, but none of the 4 accused served any jail time. After that, the Michaels requested the body of their daughter to be exhumed and buried again in a better funeral. Many thought that was the end of the horrific event, but they were very wrong. On June 6, 2013, the house where Annalise lived and died caught up in flames. Locals reported seeing a figure which was believed to be of Annalise. While the mayor said it was the work of teenagers, the terrifying part about it is that it was the 6th day of the 6th month of the year of 2013, which means 2 + 1 + 3 = 6. That's 3 6s, 666, or the devil's number. The Bone Pit. I had a wonderful childhood exploring the woods in a rural small village in Finland. We had so many beautiful places to play in. We went through every nook and cranny. We had a lot of abandoned barns and houses, and when the elderly didn't get anybody to continue the family business of running a farm, a lot of places just got forgotten. Also, places couldn't be sold because the location was too remote or houses too moldy to fix. I missed the lovely ring of old spruces near my house. It was spooky how the trees grew in a perfect circle. It sometimes got fairy rings of mushrooms inside it too. But that place got torn apart and a sparkling new road was built on it. Shame. So there were a lot of spots to check out. We got them all memorized. We'd go through the whole village in a day sometimes. We wanted to check out the same spot again. We played an there's this awesome place underneath a willow tree on the riverbank. Or it was in this swing-shaped tree in the woods. Wherever we knew there was something cool. We knew the place was like the inside of our pockets. There was this one weird anomaly that, you could never find it twice again in the same place. First time I found it, I was 7 or 9. I was playing in a small meadow near my cousin's house. Stumbled upon a small pit in the ground, big enough for an adult to fit in, curled up in a fetal position. Didn't seem to have anything growing on it. It had sun-bleached bones in it, though. They seemed to be swine bones, and they were in pieces. No skulls or ribs to be seen, but I had found pig bones before, even cow bones. They were sometimes the only signs that somebody lived there after a dilapidated house had collapsed or something like that. But this was at a meadow, though. but I still don't really think too much about it. I'd dump bones a bit further away from my house too. Perfectly reasonable. But then something caught the attention of, well, young little me. I looked away from the pit, and when I turned my attention back to it, having taken no more than 4 steps away from it, I couldn't see anybody there anymore. Or can't see that there anymore. So I did a circle around the area and even parted some grass from the meadow. Thought maybe it was covered or hidden by grass, but I just didn't remember it. Couldn't find it. Yelled over at my cousin, who I was exploring with at the time, and told her what happened. She just shrugged and told me, "Yeah, it just disappears sometimes." Continued walking. She was a very untrustworthy person, so I thought she was just yanking my chain again. Tried looking for it a bit more, even to just spite her for trying to fool me again. It had been on the meadow, on the edge of the dark old forest, but I couldn't find it anywhere near the woods. I went down to the edge of the woods in search of it. I only stopped looking when my cousin had walked quite a distance away from me, so I had to run after her to catch up. I did find the pit again next year. I remembered it, and I looked the same as ever, and no grass had grown inside it still. Wanted to inspect the bones closer, but decided against it, feeling a bit creeped out at this point. I turned my back to tell my friends about what I'd found, still standing except for turning my head, and when I looked back it was gone. Most of all, I felt frustrated. I was pissed I couldn't show anybody else the bone pit. Felt like the damn thing was taunting me. One time my little sister found it and yelled excitedly and a bit spooked about how there's bones there, come look, but I was already frustrated of it and I just told her, yeah, sure. I was just dismissing her. She was not satisfied with this, wanted to share this experience with someone, so she fetched Mom, dragged her by the arm to the spot, and it was gone. She was perplexed and searched around, parting the grass, even crawling a bit to find it, but to no avail. I told her to just let it be, and Mom had this fake, but my mom had this supportive mom aura about her. I was telling my sister how she's sure there was a bunch of old bones here just now, and oh yes, sure, that must have made my sister more agitated, feeling like nobody would believe her. I didn't know why I didn't tell her about it in more detail. Must have been real cranky that day for some reason. Thinking about walking over there just to have her pit disappear again on me just made me crankier. Earlier this year, I met up with my sister and mother and started reminiscing over some old memories when the focus went to the weird and scary stuff we experienced. So the bone pit came up. Sister told me how frustrated she was to never have anybody believe her. I told her then how I actually did believe her, but I was just cranky since I knew the nature of the pit. It would disappear before anybody would come up to it. She got animated and wide-eyed and just happy somebody actually believed her and had witnessed it too. We wondered if the ground on the meadow was just too bumpy, maybe the pit couldn't be seen from any other but one angle. But to be honest, that felt quite unlikely. It would have disappeared in us 3 times in places we knew really well. 20 years later, I still feel like it's just some apparition, which just appeared and disappeared with no explanation or reason. My first hotel. A couple of years ago, I got a job as a security officer at a resort with an indoor water park. I was on the overnight shift. During my training there, the night manager, called John, told me about how the hotel was one of the last places that a child was last seen alive before disappearing. Can't go into too many details, as the hotel is reopened under a new name, but I was more of a skeptic during this time, so I really believe John and I went about my training. A little later, I began to hear a loud tapping noise in one section of the resort. It sounded like somebody tapping on the ductwork in the hallway. I showed one of the hotel engineers, but they weren't sure what was causing this tapping. So not long after first hearing the tapping, I was checking the hotel fire extinguishers during one shift. One extinguisher was near an emergency exit inside the lower restaurant. The exit door only had a handle on the inside of the door and couldn't be opened from the exterior. That's when there was a loud slamming sound against the door in the dark restaurant. Startled, but thinking that somebody was playing a prank, I opened the door to my new fallen slow, but found no What? I opened the door to New Fallen Slow, but found no footprints. Snow, indeed. Opened the door to New Fallen Snow, but found no footprints in it or going to or from the door. Another time in the lower restaurant's kitchen, I was walking toward the door into the dining area. That's when I saw something the staff reported for years. A tall shadow figure sliding along the wall through the swinging door. Turned around, walked straight into the office. I left for a while but returned. Upon returning, my old shift partner and I started to test this entity. Like multiple but pretty bad ideas, no less. We would sit in the hotel spa and wait for stuff to happen. Felt a coldness touch my elbow in one of the rooms. I had a witness, like a shadow figure, peer out of the separate room before disappearing back behind the doorframe, and I noticed the figure. And a few days later, we heard two voices. One a female, childlike voice, and another deeper, almost demonic-like. And a set of loud footsteps going up the stairs, but found nobody inside the entire spa after clearing it. Though it was interesting to challenge whatever's, permanently inhabiting the hotel, it would have consequences. Fast forward a month or two. The hotel was officially closed after being bought out by a competitor. As security staff, we were given 60 days of extended employment under the law. This meant, working alone in the middle of the night, in an empty building, with what seemed to be multiple entities. It all started with the random banging sounds that echoed through the halls, including the time that my old shift partner and I heard what sounded like a bowling ball falling down the stairs. 2 police officers saw an old food warmer violently shake inside the lower restaurant. One refused to check on me afterwards. The same location that I would later see a floating gray mass. There were 2 times that I would hear loud childlike screams like emanating from the restaurant. I never did investigate either instance. I was alone and unarmed with no way to easily call for help. Finally, I began to see shadows inside the water park. These would show up in various locations on the child's splash tower, but one watched me start my patrols one night. After hearing a loud bang, I looked up to the slide tower to see a solid black mass. It looked like a pair of head and shoulders staring down at me as I walked through the park. Haven't returned to that property either as an employee or as a guest. Something tried to lure me to my death. I was out hiking along the river during the summer. That's when the river water was pretty low. It's still a good 300 yards at least from one side of the riverbed to the other. While I was focusing on taking photos of a rock formation, I started hearing what I thought was a man yelling my name at me from the other side of the river. When I started looking for the person yelling, I saw really nobody there, despite being able to hear them. Out of nowhere, I heard the same very loud and distinct guttural male voice screaming, "Help me!" and the sound of breaking branches. I don't know why, but rude instincts told me to run as fast as I could to the other direction, despite normally wanting to run toward danger when help is needed. Literally ran until I was lost and hopped someone's back fence only to be greeted with a ton of bones all over their backyard. Took an hour running around like a chicken with its head cut off to find my way out again. Been looking for news reports of police, like something about an assault or something out there would explain the screaming, and I never found anything. So what about the pile of bones? Lady screaming in the middle of the night. I was sleeping over at my friend's house one night. After playing some video games, we decided to go to sleep. It's around 3 a.m. and I randomly woke up to the sounds of what I thought was my friend's mom arguing with someone. All I heard was a woman screaming and crying, "$7? You did it for $7? About 3 or 4 times. Each time increasing in intensity. $7! My friend was asleep next to me, but no matter how much I shook him, he wouldn't wake up. The most I got was a moan of him brushing me off before rolling over. At first, I felt very awkward, so I stayed inside my friend's room, not wanting to get involved in his family business. It wasn't my place to, but when the screaming got even more intense, I thought if I didn't try to stop the situation from escalating, someone was going to get hurt. So despite how much I didn't want to, I got up and walked toward the door, grabbed the door handles as a lady's beginning to scream again. "You did it!" And I opened the door. And in the instant I opened the door, the screaming stopped and it was dead silent and pitch black without a single light on the rest of the house. I flicked on the light. Nobody. I said, "Hello, is everything okay?" No response. Shut the door, literally dragged my friend off the bed so he had no choice but to wake up, told him what happened, and we stayed up the rest of the night. The next morning he asked his parents if something had happened that night before. They both said no. They had slept all through the night. Actually, one of the scariest experiences of my life. $7. You did that for $7? Boarding school. I have a few stories from when I was in boarding school in the middle of the jungle in Southeast Asia. We had smaller chalets that fit 2 people clustered all over a college. These chalets had a front door to a smaller common area that leads to 2 doors to separate the 2 bedrooms. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. I was just finishing with my revision for the night, and I was just about to call it a night. Heard the front door open and immediately slam shut. Thought my roommate was having a bad night, so I called his name, no reply. Thought it was a bit weird, but didn't think much of it to give him some space. Heard the same thing happen to his bedroom door, so I just left it. About 30 minutes later, I start hearing loud banging from his room. It sounded like all of his cupboards and shelves were being opened and slammed shut super violently. This was when I got up to check on him. I was also worried that somebody had gotten into his room and was trying to steal stuff. Please note that this college was notorious for monkeys sneaking in and around our rooms trying to find food, so I was looking out for them as well. When I opened his bedroom door, everything looked normal. Nobody was in the room. I got freaked out and went back to my room to call my roommate. That's when he picked up the phone and he told me he was staying over at his friend's place for the night. That's when the noises started kicking off again. At this point, I'm too freaked out to go back to his room, so I locked the door and stayed in my room. I thought that my mind was just playing tricks with me, so I started to look out my window to see if anybody was messing with me. That's when I saw one of the security guards walk by our chalet. After a quick chat, the guard told me that he was called in for a noise complaint. He had been hearing the noises as well, and to stay in my room and to not interact with or entertain or whatever it was. He told me that these types of things happen regularly since we were in the middle of the jungle. College in the jungle. I like it. Creepy granny story. My life is full of stuff like that. Sometimes it's, even scary how often it happens. That time completely shocked me. Couldn't sleep for about a week, so I was home alone and it was late. So I was trying to get to bed. For some reason, I was feeling so terrified all evening. My heart rate was so fast, I was sweating and I was shaking. I have some problems with panic attacks. I thought this was one of them. So I tried to calm myself, swallowed some pills, and went to bed. Around 1 a.m., I started to wake up because of noises, steps and knocks. So I was exhausted. I was falling back asleep almost instantly. Sometime later, sounds stopped, and so was my panic. I thought that it's okay for now and I can fully relax and have some sleep. As expected, I was wrong. Almost immediately after I closed my eyes, I started to see a strange dream. I was in my room and nothing was different. All my stuff was at its place. The only thing, it wasn't night outside, it was evening. Sun already down and the sky was all red. Actually, it was kind of terrifying. So I stood up on the bed, decided to go drink some water. Turned out the door was locked. I panicked because I don't even have a lock on my door. I don't know what to do, so I sit back on bed and start reading my phone to call someone. Well, panic level was too high. Suddenly a door opened, I froze in fear. A strange man in a black outfit, completely bald and without a face, was standing there. "You may come in, Grandma." Then some old lady actually entered my room, came toward me, and sat on the bed next to me. The man in the doorway disappeared and the door closed loudly. Granny started talking to me. Never saw her before, by the way, and she just looked very sad, almost like crying. Wanted to calm her, but she refused and started speaking. "My dear, I'm really sorry for what I'm going to do, but I'm completely alone. All my family and friends already died so long ago. I have no one. Afraid at this point, you're the only one who can help me." She started crying. I'm so sorry, I have no choice." I stood up and she laid on my bed. I was really confused and didn't know what was happening. Suddenly, a very bright thought just appeared in my head, so fast and strong like a lightning strike. I realized the old lady was laying on my bed in the same pose and position that I fall asleep. I started choking and woke up almost with a scream. I was so freaked out I jumped out of my bed, turned on the lights, and I couldn't sleep at all that night. So I just watched some, YouTube till dawn. Around 7 a.m., I heard ambulances at our house. I was scared to go out of my apartment to see what happened. Sometime later, my grandma told me that our neighbor from lower floor had passed out. And yes, it was a lonely old lady. I think I'll never forget that night. The White House. No, not that White House. This is a house that I lived in when I was a teenager. In my family, we referred to it as the White House because that's what it was, a big split-level white house with a big porch. We lived in a very small town at the time. We lived on the outskirts of town in a pretty tiny cabin in the woods. On our rides into town for groceries or to go to school, we would ride past a house on Main Street. It was different from the other houses. It was different in that it was set very far back on its plot, so the front yard was bigger than all the other houses. It was also different in that it was fairly big, at least compared to the neighboring houses. Had a long driveway and an old carriage barn at the end of it. No one lived there, though, for some reason. I always got an ominous feeling from the house. But the summer that I was 12, well, my mom came home one day. She told me that we were moving, that she had already found a place and that it was in town. The next day, she asked me if I wanted to ride into town with her so she'd show me the house that she lined up. I was excited to see where we'd be living since we'd been living in the country since we moved to that town. When she pulled into the long driveway of our new place, the one thing I said to her was, "I don't like this house." It was an ominous house. She was understandably irritated with me and replied, "Well, too bad." A week later, we packed up and moved in. Despite my bad feeling about the house, it was pretty nice inside. Moved inside the bottom unit. There's a unit above us that was empty. There were 3 bedrooms and they all had their own full bathrooms. There was also a functional wood-burning fireplace. Thought that was hella cool. Chose the bedroom off the kitchen at the back of the house. Had a built-in counter and cabinets. As we were moving in, I started noticing little things about the house. Like there were floodlights in the living room walls, all the kitchen cabinets had numbers on the inside of their doors. All their shelves were lettered. Found a paper taped to the edge of one of these shelves that had Richard Snyder's Meds written on it. That's when my mom told me that the house was like an old county mental health facility at one point. I didn't think too much of it. It was pretty chill for about a month. That was until we started hearing things upstairs. It sounded like somebody dragging something across the floor up there. We'd hear footsteps and somebody walking up the stairs to the unit. At one point, my mom even went to check the door upstairs and it was locked to make sure. She wanted to make sure no one was breaking in or squatting up there. It was locked. She called the landlord, asked him if anybody was working up there. He said no one had been up there since we moved in. Strange. For the rest of the summer, my stepsister stayed with us. We spent a lot of time outside exploring the new space. We were interested in the carriage barn, especially. We weren't supposed to play in there because it was the garage for the upstairs unit. We had our own attached garage. But since nobody lived up there and the carriage barn was unlocked, my mom said we could go in there, but to be careful not to fuck with anything. Apparently, there was a ladder that went up to the upper part of the barn. It was a very old-looking ladder, and we didn't really trust it, so we didn't look up there. There was also a little cute, windowed room in there. There were built-in shelves and a table in the center of the room. There is also an old piano in this room. For some reason, when we went into that room, we started to pretend that we were ghost hunters. We were asking who was there and who they were, and, well, we even left questions on a pad of paper, left it in there with a pen. Nothing happened that, but mind you, the only thing that we knew about this property was that it was an old county mental health place. And that really wasn't that frightening to us. We just felt that that carriage barn had more to it. We stopped playing there after a few days. Nothing significant happened in the house until autumn of the first year there. I had my best friend at the time. We were there after school. We were in my room shouting the shit, and we just both saw a man. He was in a yellow coat standing at the stove. He was there long enough for us to notice him, but gone before we could see him clearly. That was the only time I ever saw something in that house. The other times were like things on the TV going on and off, or the channels changing on their own. If we were listening to CDs, they would skip tracks or the volumes would fluctuate. The other was feeling like you weren't alone. Whatever was there made me feel scared. Never really that scared. It actually sometimes felt friendly, and sometimes it felt sad. It felt like it just wanted to let us know that it was there, but that we could all live together. It was strange, but nothing that was too bad for me, given the shit I've experienced in the past. One thing I didn't like was that my little sister saw something. She was very young at the time. She was 2 years old, and she pointed at my mom's closet and told me, "A guy go in there." The strangest thing that happened in that house happened to me. I was 14 at the time. This is going to sound like sleep paralysis, but I'm not completely sure really what it was. It was around 12 a.m. I was just about to sleep. That's when my body started to feel like there was static coursing through it. It felt like someone sitting on the edge of my bed, but I couldn't see them. All I could hear was static and whispers and a car engine starting up. The car sounded like it was coming from the direction of the carriage barn. I also felt inexplicably sad to the core. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out of my mouth. I was trying so hard to scream that my throat hurt. I tried to move, but every movement that I made was like stop motion. I couldn't stand no matter how hard I tried, so I crawled off my bed. And toward my bedroom door. Finally made it to the threshold of my doorway, and the sun was up. The feeling in my body faded. I slowly stood up. My body was getting ready to leave for work when she saw me standing there. She said I didn't look so good. I asked if I was okay. Told her that I didn't sleep well, but she said that she's called the school for me, told me to stay home. I was honestly fucking shook. I don't know how to explain to her what happened, so I just didn't. It wasn't until after we moved out that my mom told me that, well, really what she learned about this house. There was a man who lived there long before. It was a mental health facility, and his name was Kenny Whitney. He lived there and he gave piano lessons. He was also a gay man. When he came out to his family, they disowned him. He drove his car into the carriage barn, started it up and breathed in the fumes, and he killed himself. I think that's what happened to me, was Kenny trying to tell me who he was or tell me what happened. When I go back to that town, I feel drawn to that house, catch myself staring at it when I pass it. I dream about it often find myself wishing I could live in it again. Ghost of Christmas Past. A haunted hotel. Stay right after the holidays. My family, being me, my husband, my daughter, who just turned a year old, went to a spa and hotel right after Christmas. It was a supposed haunted place. They even offer ghost tours and ghost packages. I think that sort of thing is fun, but it seemed like a way for a hotel to make extra money, so I didn't really think of it as being really haunted. Went to high school in Colorado. We visited the Stanley Hotel. I don't mind spooky stuff at all. But anyways, this hotel is located in a small town with hot springs that was built upon because the water supposedly had healing and medicinal properties. There's not really a ton to do there. The town itself was kind of sad and kind of worn down. We went through the town museum that showed the history of the town and the bathhouses and got lunch. When we got back to our hotel, we were down the hall. You could hear radio blasting. It was distorted. It was so loud. And as we got closer, it wasn't just on one channel. It was scanning through different stations. As we stood outside our door to unlock it, we realized the blasting radio was coming from our room. The maid had come in before we left for lunch, so nobody should have been in there. And aside, my dad works for hotels. There's a couple of things I always do because I'm used to staying in them. One of which being to turn off the alarm when you arrive in case a previous occupant set in. We went to sleep in, and this was one of our main goals for the trip. My daughter, who used to be a great sleeper, did a good job sleeping the first night. The second night, she was screaming like something was really wrong. She pulled herself up, pack and play, and just jumping up and down, red-faced. She was desperate to get out. I couldn't get her to calm down. I know she was a baby and it was a new place, and this was unusual. I held her, took her to bed with us, but she, clung to me all night. Last thing, my husband got me a massage, as a Christmas gift. So I walked down to the grotto area, took my daughter to the pool. In the waiting area, there were these, there's pretty serious feeling, no talking, no noise, no phones. It is a nice spa, and the massage was expensive. Not the kind of place where you would pull stunts. The therapist took me to my room when it was my turn. She said a few things and turned on relaxing music. I think it was ocean waves. Told me to get undressed, to lay on my stomach, and she'd be right back. Got undressed, got under the sheet, and was waiting for her to come back, and all of a sudden the music just turned to FM radio. Got really loud and was searching through a bunch of channels. The therapist knocked and came in. She walked right over to the radio and said, "It happened all the time. Ghosts have been messing with this all day." Then got back to work. Business as usual. Wish I took a ghost tour so I knew more. Thought it was hotkey marketing, but this hotel was definitely haunted. Kinda want to go back to see if it really was one more time. A part of me is genuinely freaked out and wants to stay away. Woman on trail in the dead of night. I was about 18 years old when this took place. It was only a couple of years ago. One of my best friends, let's call him Nick, he used to live a couple of towns over. It was the summer right after we graduated, and we used to hang out all the time. So there's a solid month or two where I would go to his neighborhood and we would smoke for a few hours in my car, and his neighborhood was a very quaint suburb area with lots of old people living there. We had a couple of spots that we would sometimes, popular forest trails at the front of the neighborhood, and you can see a lot of people running and walking and biking through there throughout the day. And, one evening we decided that we would smoke on this trail. This wasn't out of the ordinary for us at this point, so we walked maybe a mile and a half into this trail, casually chatted and joked around as friends do. Eventually, we found a bench where we sat down and started smoking, talking about our days and topics of our interest. We saw a middle-aged man briefly jogging by us as we sat on the bench, and that was the only person we saw during our walk through the trail. By the time we finished smoking, the sun was already going down and it was getting dark. So we mentioned going back to the car and keep rolling up and continuing our session. We started walking back the way we came from. Nick and I were just talking or whatever, and can't remember what we were talking about since it was casual. But we'd already gotten into the routine of just shooting the shit all the time. Eventually, we continued walking. It became darker. So dark, I couldn't really see much. I was trying to allow my eyes to adjust to the dark. Got to the point where my eyes were adjusting to it, so the trail had more of a bluish hint to it. Instead of it being, pitch black. Kind of like how horror movies try to portray the night. Although the forest line around us in the distance was still so dark you couldn't really see into it. As Nick and I were making our way through the trail, we got to the point where the trail was straight with a bend at the end of it. It was cutting off our vision from the rest of the path. It couldn't have been any farther than 150, 200 feet away from where the cutoff seemed to be. Nick was on the right side as we were chatting. We were shoulder to shoulder walking at the same pace. As we were walking, a small beam of white light seemed to be cutting through the dark shrouded trees ahead of us. It was slightly to the left off the trail, still in front of us but not off the pathway. In my head, without any concern of the light, I assumed it was moonlight reflecting off the riverbank to the right of us. But as we continued walking toward it, I noticed that the beam of light was moving as well, like I was talking at this moment, and as my eyes began locking onto this figure, my words slowly started to drift away into a dead silence. To my surprise, Nick was also locked on this weird light figure. Our pace slowed down as we quietly watched this figure. It was emerging from the forest. It had a whitish-gray figure, seemed unfazed by the ground as it was moving in our direction in the distance. Nick eventually broke our silence. "Do you see that?" He knew I was looking at it as well, but neither Nick or I were religious or believe in spirits, and my brain started to try to come up with the most logical answer, and I quickly replied, "I think it's just moonlight." He responds, "I don't think so." Now, the figure was maybe 60 feet away, and we could tell it was a human shape. It had legs, it had shoulders that moved in pace with its stride. Although it didn't seem to be fazed by the pitch-black ground beneath it, it started to get scared. I started to get scared. It looked like a woman in a white dress walking toward us with white legs and arms and a head. No hair I could see. Knowing all too well what this means in horror movies, my mind begins racing for more rational conclusions. Thought to myself, well, maybe it's a man in a white coat walking on the trail. That only left me with the question as to why a man would be walking to the trail this late at night. My heart began pounding as this woman with a white glow started coming closer and closer. I tried hard to make out a face, but it was night and I could only see the distinct white figure of her. She had the glow of the moon. Everything from head to toe was all white. Nick and I at this point halted in our tracks at the same time. We were locking onto this glowing woman who was walking directly into our path. We could tell that if she were to continue walking towards us, she'd have to walk through us. She was dead center on the path, continuously walking closer and closer. At this point, I was so terrified. I was completely in suspended disbelief. Beside the odd occasion of a door shutting at random in my house, I've never seen what seemed to be a spirit so clearly. I could see this was a woman in a dress. Although I was scared out of my mind, an overwhelming sense of tranquility was coming over me, like I had nothing to be afraid of. The woman became so close that she couldn't have been more than 20 feet, maybe 30 feet in front of us at this moment, so close you could guess her height, and she was tall enough to be somewhat eye level with her, so I couldn't see any eyes, though. There was no distinct facial features besides maybe the shape of the nose. I can't begin to express how clear and close the woman got to us. It's like dead in our tracks, just locked onto her, and we sat there silently watching her, getting ready to walk in between us. Without any thought to it, simultaneously Nick and I locked eyes with each other, and a look of horror and confusion in his eyes reassured me that he was seeing the same thing as me. "Dude, what is that?" We quickly shot our eyes back and forth in front of us. She was gone, completely vanished, as if there wasn't at all a glowing white woman walking no farther than 20 feet ahead of us. We began to speed walk in silence. Neither of us wanted to seem scared at first, so much was running through my mind, just trying to comprehend what just happened. Eventually I spoke up and all I said was, "Let's go." We both started running as fast as we could without even looking back. Lost track of how far we were at that point. It was definitely more than half a mile up. But as fast as we ran, it seemed like we were at the end of a trail within seconds. This whole ordeal was probably only around a minute long, but from the sheer horror, it felt like time came to a standstill. We quickly got into the car park near the trail entrance, and I hightailed it back to his house. Nick began saying, "Bro, what just happened? We both saw that, right?" We began confirming with each other that everything we had just witnessed was true. We asked, what did we see? What did we see? How did she show herself to us? What does this mean? My understanding of reality was completely altered. It felt like such a dystopian reality when it occurred, like we stumbled into limbo of some sort. To this day, I have no idea what else it could have been. It was so real and the area became so unnatural when this happened. What creeps me out the most and kind of comforts my sanity is that we both saw it. We both saw a woman in a dress glowing white walking towards us with an unfazed, uninterrupted stride. Like it wasn't actually walking on the ground. We didn't even hear footsteps or anything. I suggested that due to there being a lot of old folks who live in the area, that it was the spirit of somebody who lived there, possibly enjoyed the trail in their youth. I've also heard that the area was a popular ground during the Civil War. Nick and I reminisce occasionally about our experience. We've even attempted going back with the intentions of seeing her again. However, when we did, I was overwhelmed with the gut feeling to turn back around before we saw something. Since then, I've been more open to the idea of spirits and still can't really wrap my head around what we saw. We tell the story to our friends and loved ones, but when we do, it doesn't have the same surrealness to it. They usually laugh it off as yet another wild story. Except it was actually a truly reality-warping experience. I wonder if anybody has any similar stories or experiences. Thank you for reading. I'm interested to be here for feedback and your stories as well. See ya. The White House. No, not that White House. This is the White House I lived in when I was a teenager. My family, we refer to it as the White House because that's what it was, a big split-level White House with a big porch. We lived in a very small town at the time. We lived on the outskirts of a town, a tiny cabin in the woods. Our rides into towns or groceries or to go to school, we'd pass a house on Main Street. It was different from all the other houses. It was different in that it was set way back on its plot so far from the yards, bigger than all the other houses. It was also different in that it was fairly big compared to the neighboring houses. It had a long driveway with an old carriage barn at the end of it. No one lived there, though. For some reason, I always got an ominous feeling from that house as we rode by it. The summer that I was 12, my mom came home one day and told me that we were moving. She had already found a place, and it was in town. The next day, she asked me if I wanted to ride into town with her, and she'd show me the house that she had lined up. I was excited to see where we'd be living, since we'd been living in the country since we moved into that town. When she pulled into the long driveway of her new place, the only thing I said to her was, "I don't like this house." It was the ominous house. She was understandably irritated with this and replied to me, "Well, too bad." A week later, we packed up and moved in. Despite my bad feeling about the house, it was pretty nice inside. We moved into the bottom unit. There's a unit above us that was empty. There were 3 bedrooms and they all had their own full bathrooms. There was also a functional wood-burning fireplace. Thought that was hella cool. Chose the bedroom off the kitchen. It was at the back of the house. Had a built-in counter and cabinets. As we moved in, I started noticing little things about the house. There were floodlights in the living room, and all the kitchen cabinets had numbers on the inside of the doors. We found a piece of paper taped to the edge of one of these shelves. It had Richard Snyder's Meds written on it. That's when my mom told me that the house was used as an old county mental health facility at one point. Didn't think too much of it. It was pretty chill for about a month until we started hearing things upstairs. It sounded like somebody dragging something across the floor up there. We'd hear footsteps and somebody walking up the stairs to the unit. At one point, my mom even went to check if the door on the stairs was locked to make sure nobody broke in and was squatting up there. But it was locked. She called the landlord and asked him. For the rest of that summer, my stepsister stayed with us. Spent a lot of time outside exploring the new space. We weren't really interested in the carriage barn. But sometimes we were. We weren't really supposed to play in there because, well, it was a garage for the upstairs unit. We had our own attached garage. But since nobody lived up there and the carriage barn was unlocked, my mom said that we could go in there, but be careful not to fuck with anything. There was a ladder that went up the upper part of the barn. It was a very old-looking ladder and we didn't really trust it, so we didn't really look up there. There was also a cute little windowed room in there. It had built-in shelves and a table in the center of the floor. There was also an old piano in this room, and for some reason we went into that room and started to, pretend that we were ghost hunters. We were asking who was there and who we were and why they were there. We even left questions on a pad of paper and left it in there with a pen. Nothing happened with that, though. Mind you, the only thing that we knew about this property was that it was an old county mental health place. It wasn't really frightening to us. It just felt like that carriage barn had more to it. Well, nothing significant happened in the house until autumn of that first year. I had my best friend at the time after school, and, well, we were in my room shooting the shit, and we both saw a man in a yellow coat standing at the stove. He was there long enough for us to notice him, but gone before we could see him clearly. That was the only time I ever saw something in that house. The other times were things like the TV going off and on, like changing channels. Well, this one time, my sister was very young at the time. She was 2 years old, and she pointed at my mom's closet and told me, "Guy, go in there." And the strangest thing that happened in that house happened to me. I was 14 at the time. This is going to sound like sleep paralysis, but I'm not really completely sure what it was. I was around 12. My body started to feel like there was static coursing through it. I felt someone sit at the edge of my bed, but I couldn't see them. All I could hear was static and whispers and a car engine starting up. The car sounded like it was coming from the direction of the carriage barn. I also felt inexplicably sad to the core. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. I was trying hard to scream, but my throat hurt. I tried to move, but every movement that I made was like a stop motion. I couldn't stand up no matter how hard I tried to crawl. I crawled off the bed and toward my bedroom door, and I finally made it to the threshold of my doorway, and the sun was up. The feeling in my body faded, and I slowly stood up. It really wasn't until after we moved out that my mom told me that she learned about the house. There was a man who lived in there long before the mental health place. His name was Kenny Whitney. He lived there and he gave piano lessons. He was also a gay man. When he came out to his family, they disowned him. He drove his car into the carriage barn, started it up, and breathed in fumes. Killed himself. I think that's what happened to me when Kenny was trying to tell me that, well, he was trying to tell me what happened. When I go back to that town, I feel drawn to that house. Catch myself staring at it when I pass it. I dream about it pretty often. I often find myself wishing I could live in it again. Well, I often find myself hoping I'll see you guys tomorrow. See ya.